Boom. We are live.
Episode 3.
Yes. New mic. I probably sound so much better.
You do. And I watched last episode and it wasn't unbearable, but these are the small incremental improvements that I think we were hoping to make. And some of them are going to be easier, like just buying a new microphone than others. But I'm excited for this episode. We're going to be hopping into sort of a really tactical topic, being like aspect ratios on posts. We sort of talked about a little bit. I posted on LinkedIn preceding this episode about working with different aspect ratios. I focused on vertical, which is something that we're going to go over. But I'm excited. I think there's going to be some good takeaways here for everybody listening.
For sure. I agree. What do we start with?
Well, let's since I talked about vertical this morning on LinkedIn, if you don't, go connect with Jordan and I on LinkedIn. But I want to look at first, and I'm going to have to share my screen here. But I'm going to look at a vertical aspect ratio. Oh my goodness. Jordan, you might have to, oh, just kidding. I think I can do it. Yeah.
I think if you share your screen, I can add it to the stream.
Okay. We just unfortunately might not be able to, I'm not sure if sound's going to. Okay. Jordan, you might have to start. I'm working 2 monitors right now with Safari in one, and I think I'm going to have to reopen everything in Chrome.
Okay. That's fine.
Opening technical difficulties, but Jordan will start with some of his examples because we want to walk through.
Do we want to do
good
LinkedIn
ratios
first?
Yeah, why don't we start with that?
Okay. All right, I'm gonna go to my LinkedIn profile here. Share my screen.
Great.
So LinkedIn, I don't really limit myself to strictly vertical, or at least I try not to.
Mm-hmm.
That's because I guess most of the work I do, a lot of it shows better when it's 1920 by 1080, so horizontal.
Yeah.
But hang on.
How much are you?
I was pulled up.
You're good. How much are you thinking about shooting for a specific aspect ratio when you're shooting? Like, does the mindset change with something as like nuanced as, a square post, so a 1x1 versus a horizontal, a 16:9, or are those for all intents and purposes the same for you?
Mostly the same. If I'm going to shoot something that I know it's going to be vertical, honestly, it's mostly TikTok. If I'm trying to make a piece of content like for TikTok, then I'm literally tilting my camera to the side. Mm-hmm. Other than that, I'm keeping it, horizontal, 16:9.
Right.
And that's just because everywhere else that I post, I'm able to like add these borders. So this post, for example, it's 1080 by 1350, but it's 2 1920 by 1080 clips with just some borders over the top.
100%.
Yeah.
Which I think is important to note because a lot of when, like, there's basically 2 schools of thought, like, and I think a lot of what people do now is sort of repurpose the traditional horizontal format content for different aspect ratios, which I think is 100% okay. And I think that's a great start. But it's interesting when you talk about like shooting specifically for a different aspect ratio. And I'll have an example pulled up here. I think it really makes a world of difference. And I love the way that you get creative with sort of switching around the content that you have. But I think it's important to note that there's like a difference between shooting for it and then having to edit for it.
And I've wanted to actually get into more of shooting vertical just, for Instagram and stuff. Yeah. I've seen other creators do it where they literally have like a B-roll sequence or something that they filmed vertical because they know they're going to put it on just Instagram or just TikTok or something. Mm-hmm. And that's something I want to do more of in the future, obviously. But
yeah.
Do you have your screen ready if you want to pull that up?
Yeah. So I want to hop right into sort of a vertical aspect ratio that was, I know, shot for vertical. These are 2 creators here that named Colin and Samir, 2 really cool creators out in LA. They do a lot of brand work. Samir, who is the guy right here, started a channel on YouTube called the Lacrosse Network, which he basically created in his early 20s. That was supposed to be an ESPN style network specifically for the sport of lacrosse, which is and still and was like a pretty niche sport. And so they started this YouTube channel. It's really funny to look back on some of their older videos because they're shot with webcams. Now these guys are, proper videographers, but it's funny to see. I think we sort of take a similar tone to this where it's like, if there's an audience for it and if you're passionate about it, it really doesn't matter if you're shooting with $1,000 cameras or your webcam. Like they're still able to create an audience, and they ended up getting bought out by Whistle Sports, and then they're now on their own doing YouTube and different stuff like that. But if we watch here, you can kind of see that this was all shot for, he's holding a camera and it's shot for vertical. And you can see that with the text that's included. There's different graphics that kind of play throughout here, and different stuff like this. But this was all meant and intentionally shot vertically. And they even have some more IGTV videos that are just a really cool way. And I'm not logged in here, so I can't click it, but you can sort of see like they really interestingly kind of framed a lot of these shots. You can see in this one a little bit where, they're going to have a couple shots stacked. So similar to how Jordan did his, but like I talked about in the LinkedIn post, or like we talk about here, when you intentionally shoot for that aspect ratio, you can have a little bit more flexibility, or maybe just look a little bit more native to the platform, which I think is equally important. But Jordan, from a creator standpoint, so from like a videographer standpoint, what are how different is it to shoot for vertical versus just shooting sort of traditionally horizontally?
It's actually quite a bit different. I always try to, excuse me, use a wide lens, and then obviously, I mean, you still don't have the sides to work with, because everything, from really cool photos to really cool video, and you watch a movie in the movie theaters, it's almost like flat how wide it is. It's crazy. But yeah, it's a lot different. You have to frame up your shots differently. Let me see if I can pull up an example of.
Yeah, and I think it's I think it's really a matter of like the difficult part from somebody from your perspective is like there's really a limited area of places right now where you can put this sort of vertical content where it's really native. And I'm curious to hear your thoughts, but it seems to me it's almost like just more beneficial to shoot horizontally, in a 1920 by 1080 aspect ratio, where you can utilize it more easily on a bunch of different platforms, rather than shooting vertically, where it probably will only be able to be utilized on a handful of platforms. Is that sort of the mindset that you've taken? That's
very true. And especially if I'm going to be using it, on YouTube or something, or if it's commercial work for a company, it's definitely always going to be shot 1920 by 1080. Unless they, specifically tell me we want this vertical format because we're just going to be running an Instagram ad with it, which I've ran into maybe once.
Sure.
But yes, it is so much easier just to 1920 by 1080 and then make it easier on the eyes in post-production, if that makes sense.
Yep. So Jordan pulls up an example. I think if you guys want to check out more really well done vertical video, I would encourage you to check out Colin and Samir, and specifically the stuff they do on IGTV, just because you'll get a really good idea of what either a kind of horizontal content looks like when it's edited to work as vertical, or what it looks like to have natively shot vertical content, which, like I said, I think there's it's sort of the Wild West of the content creation space right now. But
okay. I'll show you this clip now quick.
Cool.
This is from Landon, by the way. He's one of the creators I follow quite a bit. But that's my LinkedIn screen. Backstory on this, they just put out a video on YouTube basically explaining how to shoot strictly vertical video. And it was a super cool process. And then he later went up and just posted this video. I think it was today, actually. Yeah, 9 hours ago. But can you hear that sound?
Try it again. I cannot.
Okay, that's fine. You don't need the sound, but so basically every shot here is made for vertical posting, and like you said, Ty, throwing in the graphics ties everything in and makes it look good.
Yeah, I think that's a big part of it. Like you said, like having stuff that's not cut off.
Yep.
And I think here the clear part is that everything is kind of framed up in the middle.
Right.
It's sort of meant to look that way, which I think you often run into the problem when you're trying to square that or fit that, round peg into a square hole, where you have stuff that's off framed or cut off a little bit or just doesn't look as good.
And that's why it's obviously hard to try to always transfer a horizontal video to verticals. You're automatically cutting stuff off of your video. 100%. And that's why it is important at times to shoot vertical.
Yeah. I want to put an example really quickly for everybody where it's just kind of another example. I really like the stuff that sort of Jordan shows and does just from the standpoint of like editing differently, because I think that's where a lot of people probably are going to be. You know, they're going to be in a spot where they have horizontal video that they're going to have to repurpose. And you can kind of see here, this is a clip I did for a podcast that I produce over at Prep Network, where basically you have the top frame is our host talking, and then the bottom frame is that horizontal layout of, you know, of some basketball clips going on. And I think the unique part about vertical for me, especially in terms of like podcasting or maybe stuff that's a little bit more like explanatory heavy, is the fact that you can kind of have two visual stimulus going on at the same time. So a lot of these clips, and you know, I'm the one editing them, so I sort of fall into it sometimes, but a lot of them are just kind of talking head clips as I scroll here. Like they look a little bit more like this one right here, where they're just him talking to the camera, which there's great information. It's great stuff for our target audience, but it's also not the most engaging visually. So I think it often helps when we can do stuff that are a little bit more closer to this right here, where there's multiple stuff happening at the same time. And I think, again, that comes back to our conversation. And the more I think about our conversation last week, talking about levels of engagement, I think it just adds another layer of something for people to engage with from a visual aspect, at least.
I love that format. I've never seen that. I think that's great for especially podcasts, like you just mentioned, where they have the talking head and it is good information. And yes, your target audience may listen to it, but if you have that extra visual piece, I mean, that just adds a whole other aspect to social media that, you know, they're not getting from just the podcast platform.
Yeah. And really it's all about cramming. And the part that I'm so like bullish on vertical about is that you can cram, it seems like, so much more visual information into the same amount of space. And we always hear about the fact that the taller your video is, the more space is going to take up in the timeline. But that's, you know, that's really true from like a scrolling standpoint, but then it's also true from like a visual standpoint of there's just different ways that you can incorporate information, visual information in vertical video that you can in horizontal video. And I think the funny part about this one is it's like this clip is literally that's just like B-roll essentially of a basketball game happening. But it's relevant enough to what he's talking about to where, you know, you could watch that and be visually entertained
and still hear what he's saying. Yeah.
While still hearing what he's saying. So I think that's a really interesting thought to have as well.
I like that a lot. And that, I mean, you mentioning that B-roll there, that's just a whole nother, I guess we see B-roll in normal videos. It's just, you know, subbed in shots of what someone's explaining, but having the talking head there is just a whole other aspect that I think can draw people in as well.
100%. And when you kind of play around with different formats and you can kind of incorporate, you know, you don't have to lose that personality. You don't have to lose that visual aspect of the host actually talking. But then you can also incorporate something that's going to be visually stimulating. Whereas I think when you're talking about B-roll, it sort of switches back and forth, which is fine and probably serves its own purpose. But, you know, another way to sort of differentiate yourself and being creative with this whole thing. And yeah, I think it's something that's really interesting and curious to explore. And like I said, it's not something I see a ton of right now. And so I think it's sort of a space where there's a lot of potential for people to do some really interesting things with it. Sort of the Wild West, like I implied earlier.
For sure. I think just to touch on not a lot of people doing it, I think the first time I saw it or got drawn into it was with a Gary Vaynerchuk post. And I'm going to pull one up quick just to show you what I'm talking about. But it's basically his talking head, but you know, he has the title, the captions. It's like everyone's doing it now.
Yep.
But he was the first one I saw do it. So just something like this. Like automatically you're drawn into the video, you're drawn into the title. Yeah. It's a vertical aspect ratio, and then you can listen without sound. You're able to read.
And I think that's, you know, that stuff that's been around for a little while. You kind of see it in these more, but I think you paused in an interesting place where there's even some stuff scrolling at the bottom.
Right.
Again, just compacting as much visual information as you can, coming back to that levels of engagement. You know, maybe people aren't listening, but they're watching. Maybe people aren't paying attention to the lower half of the screen, but if they were, you know, they're getting an extra tidbit of information. which I think is really valuable, especially when you're in the space that he sort of is in, where you're just getting out content. It's not all going to be perfect and a cinematic masterpiece, but it is going to convey a message as practically as possible.
Right. And I think it's important because you had just mentioned that, it's been there for a while, and I talked about everyone's doing it now, and it's finding like the little nuances that no one else is doing to make yours stand out. So how Gary has his logo and sound effects pop up 2 seconds into the video, little things like that just makes his stand out a little bit more. And then people are going to catch on to that, and he'll have to figure out something else to do. But it's, that continued evolution.
100%. And I think, the reason he talks about doing the audio thing is because there's going to be such a thing as audio branding somewhere down the line, to where we're branding ourselves in all these different mediums. And it is valuable because there are times when you're listening to a podcast and you're only listening to something. So how do you convey a unique brand aside? There's intro music and set intros for like all that sort of stuff kind of conveys a brand, and it's just going a level even farther. So it's really crazy. Another thing I want to touch on, and Jordan, this is something that you're ever going to learn because I mentioned at the beginning, but there is such a thing now as thumbnails on LinkedIn. And I know a lot of our audience certainly is interested in LinkedIn, as they very well should be, just because it's a platform like we talked about. There's a lot of organic reach, so much organic reach, a lot of relevant professionals are there. And sort of the nice part is that you can be engaging with people based on a profession or area of interest or different things like that. Jordan, is my screen pulled up? I don't see it on.
Oh, yep. Sorry. I got to click on it.
And so there's just a lot of really interesting things you can do with it. And to come back to this visual information thing, thumbnails are something that's really important. And Jordan, you and I well know that when you're creating videos on LinkedIn, there was nothing like YouTube, which does it really well, where you can just upload an independent image file as a thumbnail. You actually had to put it into the video. So it was one extra step that was just kind of a pain in the butt, where you made the first frame, so like 0.01 seconds, an image. That way, when the video displayed in people's feeds, it would show up with that thumbnail, and not like, see this video right here for everybody watching. It's just the first frame of the video.
Carol.
It's not as visually appealing. Yeah, I did a little Carol Baskin joke in the
that was hilarious, by the way.
I appreciate that. We'll play it for everybody who didn't see it.
And let's talk about that, because stuff like that drew me in.
Yeah, 100%. So I want to first touch on, so like this isn't a very engaging first image, but now on LinkedIn, you can go to this edit button. Yeah, this is right after you upload the video, by the way. So you go to upload the video, then you can click edit, and this little drop down menu comes down, and you can actually upload captions. So you can upload SRT files so that captions can be directly embedded. And LinkedIn has had this functionality for a while. But the cool thing about it is if people want to watch with captions, they can click a button, and if they don't, the captions will go away. So instead of like actually burning them into the video, there's an option for people to click on. And then there, of course, is an upload a thumbnail. So you can click select a thumbnail, and then you go and find a JPEG, which I had made a JPEG for another video. And then from there, you can open it, and it'll show up down here as being your thumbnail. So instead of having that be the first frame of the video, it's now just something that's overlaid on top of the video, which for me was really helpful because I like to re-upload my stuff to YouTube just as another place for people to see it. And it was super annoying because on YouTube, then the first frame would be a thumbnail because it had to be on LinkedIn. So that's changed it a little bit. But to Jordan's point, we'll watch this really quick, just the beginning of this video, and then I suppose we can talk. So I wrote.
And what is that? 3 seconds? And
3 seconds.
Got someone drawn in just because.
Yeah. And that was like exactly the point, Jordan, like you talked about when you did that Star Wars video that did really well for you. And it's back to your question you asked me, I think the very first episode, which is like how much you post about your personal life or about your personality. And that was the extent of it. 3 seconds. I'm not going to take a whole post to do it, but people kind of get a sense of my humor, hopefully. And like you said, they're drawn in. It's something that's a bit of a pattern interrupt where they're not seeing just kind of dumb, quirky humor like that on LinkedIn all the time. And like you said, I hope to draw them in a little bit with it. And it relates nothing to the video at all. It just is kind of a funny little thing for me to play around with and have fun with. So
right. And you see the same stuff on like YouTube, I guess, is someone will show a clip from the video that, kind of just leaves you hanging. They'll roll their little intro, and then boom, you want to watch the whole thing because you got to see what happens.
Right.
It's the same concept.
It's the same concept. Yeah. And I really hope to do more of that, fun stuff. And I think that is right in line with like not taking yourself too seriously and everything like that. But I think it does have a lot of like nuance, and it does provide a lot of information to the viewer about like who I am and what I'm about and little stuff like that. And to come back to the thumbnail thing, I think that's really important to pack in even more visual information before people even click on it, because there's going to be a lot of videos on LinkedIn. I think the part I like the most about it is there really is kind of a proportion to like effort on videos to success, because a lot of videos right now are just people with their phones, like talking head videos like this, which are fine and serve a great purpose. But if you're willing to put in that extra step of having a little bit more quality to what you're doing, I think there are some proportional returns to that. And I think the thumbnail is like another extra step where if you're willing to put a billboard of yourself out there, I think you'll probably see a bit higher click rate to your videos. So
I agree with that. And there's something to be said, obviously, about getting as much content out there as you can. Gary Vee always talks about it. I keep referencing Gary, but that's, I mean, I listen to his stuff a lot.
Right.
But just like you said, I feel like a lot more value can be brought if you put that extra effort into it to make it look good. As not bad as that sounds, but like when stuff looks good, people are more inclined to watch it.
Yeah. And a lot of that ties back into like the whole vertical. Like if you just post a horizontal video on a vertical platform, like I see it on TikTok or IGTV a lot, where you can kind of force feed the platform like a horizontal video and it'll just be a bunch of black bars and stuff. But people, that's not native to the platform. It's obvious that it's forced a little bit. And I think that, like you talked about, that extra step can kind of separate you a little bit, not by necessarily having more talent than anybody else or more of an audience, but willing to put in a bit of that extra effort. I think it's really, really important.
For sure.
So Jordan, and you probably have some experience making thumbnails. I think it's an important topic that I even plan to talk about. But what are some things you think about when making thumbnails that are important to wherever you're posting?
Obviously visually appealing.
Mm-hmm.
You want it to catch someone's eye. It's got to be relevant. I like to have at least an explanation of, what's going to happen in the video that they're going to watch.
Yep.
So I used to make thumbnails for VSM Real Estate's podcast. I still do. We just haven't done a podcast in a while because thank you, Corona.
Yep.
But I always display who's speaking, the title of what they're talking about, and then a little blurb underneath that just kind of goes deeper into that title. So as someone's scrolling through VSM's Instagram, I can pull it up too, but it's not really, I'm explaining it decent.
Yeah. No,
but they know exactly what's coming in that video and it looks good on the feed, which is another thing that I'll show you real quick just because I have it pulled up.
Yeah. And I'll similarly pull up one of my own thumbnails too.
So this is, so like this is all one podcast, COVID-19 market talk. You know exactly what the podcast is about.
Yep.
These podcasts with Ryan Fisher, the thumbnail is the 20% rule, how Ryan doubled his production for his first 4 years. So you know exactly what you're going to get when you click on that video.
And I think it's super important too when you talk about these feed-based platforms. So LinkedIn's a little less like this, but I think Instagram, obviously being the primary, is like, people are going to be scrolling through your feed to kind of see what you're about. And that can kind of act as an artboard and act as it's something that you have a little bit more control over to sort of express what you're about and everything like that. So I think it's really important to sort of express that sort of stuff in your thumbnails the best that you can.
And it's funny that you mentioned, the feed that people are going to be scrolling through. And I've seen, some creators who they get so strict on how their feed looks. Like they need to have a specific theme for 9 posts. Like they need to have, if it's fall, they need all their posts to be fall colors because someone's going to be looking through it. And if they see something that's blue, they're not going to want to scroll. But I mean, to me, that seems a little ridiculous in some aspects, but all in all, yes, it is better, to look prettier in your page feed.
No, I 100% agree. And I want to pull up really quickly. And I have the Colin and Samir, I'll talk about them again, but 2 people that I really look up to just in the creative space. I love check out their channel on YouTube, named the same thing. And then also they have a really good podcast, and Jordan, I'd even recommend it for you. But they're they're really like open and honest about how their creative process works, because just like us, they're two people that are really not struggling, but they're working their way through this whole creative journey. And they're really open and honest about the process that they're going through. And it's something that I've always been able to really relate to. So I actually wanted to share, because thumbnails are something that they talk about all the time. And I wanted to sort of show, if you can, what their YouTube channel looks like. So I think right off the bat, you can notice that there's a lot of the same color, which I think is really important to have sort of those branded elements, very similar to up here what their logo looks like. That yellow is really prevalent throughout. They actually, on this last video where they talked about sort of the future of video games and concerts, they had on their Instagram like a poll of like, oh, what thumbnail do you like better? So they're really kind of open and receptive to that sort of thing. But you can really tell, and this is something I have to think about a lot in my videos, especially since I'm posting on LinkedIn, that they sort of have a set prompt, like the ideal video length for YouTube, or talking about making custom links. But you don't need to portray that entire title into the thumbnail. And that's something that I've really thought about a lot. Like if you look at all these videos, like the title of the video is why concerts, or like why video games are the future of concerts. But that's nowhere represented in this thumbnail, or similar to the end of late night. All you could kind of see here is the end, or something like that. So it's like, you don't need to portray all of that information in the thumbnail. You need to take advantage of the visual element that it provides.
For sure. And you want to leave them guessing just a little bit to make them click.
100%. And I love the way that they do it. And like I said, they talk about it all the time. They also talk about how well Mr. Beast does it. They talk about what he does all the time. But you can see in this, a lot of them are even more simplistic. They don't often include text. They include kind of really ridiculous images. Like you said, like there's a crash car in the back. Like you want to know more about it. And I think his titles are also really good from the standpoint of like videos I could not upload. Like you want to learn so much more about that, or surprising my girlfriend with 100,000. Like it's really effectively portraying more visual information, and that you have to look more on. And I will say the last thing that I want to sort of talk about, and maybe in another instance for why putting text in there in the thumbnails isn't super important or helpful, is because people are sort of looking at thumbnails at this like aspect ratio, like how zoomed out it is right now is sort of how zoomed out you should be assuming your thumbnails are going to be, because people are scrolling through their phones and they're smaller.
That's a great point.
They're scrolling like this and they're smaller. So loading this up with text isn't going to do a whole lot of good. It's way better that you use this to blow up an image and make it look like you're sitting in a huge thing of roses, or just have cash be front and center of the thumbnail. So I think that's something that both of these channels, Mr. Beast and Colin Samir, also do really, really well, is they don't load it up with text. They load it up with a lot of visual information for you to interpret and then be interested in. So
that's a great point.
Yeah.
And it's crazy to me how much time that specifically YouTube creators, how much time they spend on their thumbnails. It's unbelievable. They take, some of them, I know a guy, follow him on Twitter, I'm pretty sure, but he only has like 200,000 only has like 200,000 subs, but he works full days on just one thumbnail for a video because it's that important to them, which is blowing my mind.
Yeah. An interesting thing Colin and Samir said was they sort of have learned to understand like what can they convey the concept of a video in a thumbnail, like in a thumbnail like this, where they don't have to load it up with text. Like, can they make that, it's almost starting with the thumbnail, starting with the title of the video and working backwards to sort of back up what that is going to be about. And I think it's a really interesting way to think about it. But at the end of the day, unfortunately, this is going to be people's first point of contact with a lot of your content. It's going to be the first frame as they scroll through your post, or it's going to be sort of a feed like this on YouTube. And you have to make sure that you can effectively curate a story in that frame and that title. And then once they click on the video, hopefully you've backed that up enough to where they want to keep watching and watching more of what you've posted. So
for sure.
I think it's all really good stuff. Do you have anything else, Jordan, on any of this? We kind of were all over the board, but
we were all over the board.
I like the way these conversations,
yeah,
I like the way they sort of play out organically. So
yeah, we just kind of let them go where they go. I think that's how they should be anyway.
Yeah, 100%.
I don't think I have anything else. I think we should. I was going to touch on TikTok, but I think we could spend a whole episode on TikTok.
Yeah, and maybe we should going forward. What was sort of the impetus of your thoughts there?
Basically, just same thing with aspect ratio, and then how much. And then as we started talking about thumbnail, TikTok has if you're scrolling through someone's feed, it's the little GIF they have playing of your video, and is that important? Choosing that, but I think we could spend, another 30 minutes talking strictly about TikTok, so we can save that.
Yeah. So I hope you guys sort of took away a bit of like visual, how to convey more visual information, how to sort of jam pack a bunch of it into pieces of content. I think the easiest thing to do, and I know I fall into this all the time, shooting more like talking head style videos on LinkedIn, is to plop yourself in front of a camera, talk for 5 minutes, which even in itself is hard enough. But then make a couple cuts and then send it out to the world, and think that, we talked about this earlier, but think about the fact that people kind of owe you to watch that. I have lights going on the back of me, and I don't know how that.
I like it. I thought that was on purpose.
Well, I had this remote and I didn't touch it. And then all of a sudden there's just strobe lights happening behind me like it's a party. So that's the stuff you miss if you don't watch us on YouTube. Follow us.
That's right.
Whip Up Podcast. Go subscribe. But I think it's important to understand that people don't owe you any amount of your time. We've talked about this before, but they don't owe you any amount of your time just because you put a bunch of work into a video. And you have to do as much as you can to visually engage them, auditorily engage them, and engage them from the start with a thumbnail or a title, and work your way from there. So there's so much to consider, but I think for me, that's the part that makes this whole world like the most fun.
For sure. And it pays off when you're consistent with it. And I think that's something that's big. People will give up on, the flashiness or the work put into a video when they see that they only get 12 views.
Yeah.
But you just got to be consistent and, continue to do that, because it will pay off if your content's good.
I agree. I like to think of like audience of one being yourself. Like the whole reason did the whole like Carol Baskin little sketch in the beginning of my last video is because it made me laugh, and because I follow a couple people that have that same sense of quirky humor interlaid throughout their video, and that makes it engaging and entertaining for me. And that's sort of the video that I'd want to be watching. And so I make that for myself because it makes me laugh, and then hopefully there's enough traction around it to, attract other people. But
I love that. We could spend another 30 minutes talking about that.
Yeah, but and I don't think the people need that right now. But next week we will be back with another video. Jordan and I have yet to decide on what that topic will be, but we thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you go listen to us if you want to on all streaming services. I haven't checked on iTunes yet, but I'm sure we're there right now. And then on YouTube as well, if you want to work with us on some of this visual stuff, because we do like to break down a lot of the visual. A lot of the visuals that we're talking about, we like to use those as examples, and it might be helpful for you to look at. So go follow us on Instagram, like us, subscribe to us on YouTube, and go follow us on all the podcast platforms. Enough plugging. Jordan, thank you,
Ty. Have a great weekend, man.
You too. Everybody have a great weekend. Memorial Day weekend. Don't work, just play.
Absolutely.
All right.